Hey, what's up, everybody?
And welcome back to Mile Higher Podcast. This is episode 307. I am your host, Kendall.
And I'm your host, Josh.
We are joined by our amazing production team, Ian and Janelle.
The introductions that just get better every week.
I'm really trying,
Thank you.
trying
So
to make
professional
it
today.
Thank you. That's what I was going for. Well, guys, today we're covering a case that I am shocked we haven't done up until now. I have so much to say. I know we all really do. And we are going to be talking about the death and government cover-up of Pat Tillman. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Pat Tillman. Some of you are probably pretty familiar with his story, but some of you out there may have just heard of him, especially at the time that this all happened. But there's a lot of misunderstanding as far as what really happened, and kind of a lot of false information out there. You were even saying someone you know had heard a completely different version of who he was and kind of what happened.
Yeah. We can talk about it more, but someone I know who is like relatively in the government was like, oh yeah, he was killed by his men because he was an asshole. And that's just not...
Oh my God, that's just
Isn't that
offensive.
crazy?
Yeah, and that's just not the impression you get at all while researching or learning about his story. It seemed like he was a pretty well-liked guy all around.
Yeah, I'd say he's quite the opposite of an asshole. In fact, Pat Tillman seemed like such an incredible stand-up guy. Someone, I was telling Josh last night, I would love to have had a conversation with him, like had him on our show. He seemed like such a deep person, so well-educated and just like a level above. What an amazing person. And what he really made headlines for is for famously turning down a $3.6 million contract to continue playing with the Arizona Cardinals to then join the Army Rangers following 9/11. But he was so anti, any type of publicity around that, because obviously that came with a lot. People were fascinated. How can you turn down that much money to then go and serve your country? But he wanted to be treated like any other soldier. He gave no interviews. And privately, he was afraid that the Bush administration would actually use his recruitment and deployment as propaganda. And if he were to die, he was concerned that he would be paraded down the streets, in his own words, which is exactly what happened. And how all of this shook out is unbelievable. It's truly a story that
Is it unbelievable, though?
You're right.
If you've been listening to the show for a long time, you know we've covered a lot of different government conspiracies and cover-ups, and I think it's more shocking just how bad they messed this one up.
That's what I'm saying.
And I don't want to give too much away because this is just such a wild story. But I did want to say that Pat Tillman was a stellar football player. I mean, this guy was an absolute beast. And he wasn't the tallest guy or the biggest guy, but this guy was on a whole other level
like a machine
when it comes to football, and just a total athlete. And I think some people might look at him, because if you look at a picture of him, especially in his military uniform,
he looks like a G.I. Joe or something.
Right. He looks like the guy you'd want on your recruitment posters
Uncle
for
Sam
the
wants
military.
Him specifically.
Exactly. But there's so much beneath the surface with Pat that I definitely didn't know about. I'm a big NFL fan. I'm actually wearing a Broncos Super Bowl shirt today. I love football. I love the NFL. Of course, I follow the awards show every year, and they give out the Pat Tillman Award. And that's for those who, they give those to those who show extraordinary service and, in the NFL. And he's become an icon for this award and for many of those in football. And he's not the only NFL player that has also served in the military, but he's one that had such a tragic end. And to find out what the government does to this poor guy and his family will blow your mind, and I think make you absolutely hate the military industrial complex, because
if you didn't already,
right? Because it just shows the real truth behind what their intentions are, and
The propaganda
sadly
of the
how little
lies.
they care about those that serve
Yeah.
within their own organization, which
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime. Potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
is not a total shock to many of us. I mean, there's so many veterans that come out of the military and who tell their stories, and just, the things that they go through and the decisions that are made above them is just mind blowing, and really makes you think twice about supporting it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like we support veterans, we support those that serve. Obviously, I'm grateful. I have family that served in the military. I think all of us probably have family that served in the military at some point. But it just, ever since World War II, the reasons why we go to war has been totally different. And, Pat was one of those people that quickly realized what a complete sham the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was. And we'll get into all that in more detail, but
yeah, it's definitely going to make you angry though, or it should. I was just fuming while prepping for this, like hearing all of the details and some of the clips we're going to show. It's just outrageous.
It is.
Yeah.
But of course, we want to tell you about who Pat was outside of the military, outside of football, and talk about his family as well. He has an incredible family.
Definitely.
His brothers are absolutely amazing to, they served as well, and to do, to go through what they had to go through. And they just seem like such a cool family. So yeah, let's get into his background and talk a little bit about, who Pat was.
So Patrick Daniel Tillman was born on November 6th, 1976 to his parents, Patrick Tillman Sr. and Mary Tillman. He was the oldest of three sons. He was only 2 years older than his brother Kevin, and then his brother Richard was the youngest in the family, and he considered Pat to be, quote, Superman, which I think is super accurate. And the three of them spent every day playing together, super, super close-knit family. Patrick Sr. was a lawyer, and Mary was a special education teacher who really preferred the more natural lifestyle for their children. Their family was wealthy. They grew up in a wooded area near San Jose, California, but she really wanted her kids to spend as much time outside as possible, to really use their imaginations. It's really such an ideal way to raise kids.
Very difficult these days.
I know.
I know this made me stop and think.
Bluey. It made me stop and think too.
I was like, are we setting her up for...
I mean, I don't want people out there to think our kids watching TV all day, but like sometimes when you're at a restaurant and they get wild and you don't want to bother people, and whip out Bluey.
Yeah.
Blues clues it up a little bit. But yeah, they actually did not allow the kids to watch television.
This was literally my upbringing. I really connected with this style of parenting.
We were talking about this last night because I think that made you turn out so good. And I watched so much TV as a kid. It was on 24/7 in my house, and I turned out bad.
Okay.
Just kidding.
I turned out bad.
No, but Josh, I cannot go a second of the day without something playing. I have to have sound. Even when I'm walking from like the kitchen to the bathroom, I have to watch TikTok on my way. Like, it's ridiculous.
You are never in silence.
Silence
No,
gives
she
me
hates silence.
because it makes me think, and I get anxiety, and
Which
I hate it.
could be a good thing to
Maybe
stop and
you're
think.
supposed to think.
I know. I don't
and
like
process.
Thinking. Nope, none of that for me. But anyway, it really showed, I think, this way that they raised the boys, because they all ended up
crazy
from what I can
athletic,
tell,
super intellectual,
well read, just deep
loved
people.
books, got to read a lot. I mean, reading books is such a great thing for especially a child to do, and it becomes harder when you're an adult. But
hey, our kid, we read
you get
a lot of
so
books.
much information from books, and if you think about it, if that's like all you have to do, I mean, I was a AR reading champion in my elementary school. I always go back to this because I'm proud of this accomplishment.
You talk about your AR.
My name is
all the
on
time.
a plaque in my elementary school for top AR reader out of my whole class, out of my whole grade.
Whole 20 class.
No, no.
I would just lie and pretend I read the books and
No,
I'd
you
take my
can't.
best guess at the quizzes, and I do
No,
all right.
you will fail.
I did a lot. Well, that's why I was in special education. But
Because
anyway,
fun fact, The only TV I had in my house for most of my childhood, probably up until my teenage years, so the first 13 years of my life, was a little tiny 13-inch, like old school tube TV that had the dial to change the channel on it. And it never came on, ever. Like we'd have a movie once in a while, but we never watched it.
See, my parents would put a mini TV right on the kitchen table for us.
Yeah, I
would have loved that as a kid.
You
And
guys would,
bungee corded it into our car for road trips.
I remember that.
We could watch VHS.
Dude, you always had the TV.
Yeah.
I would go
Even
over
when
there
playing.
and we'd be like eating breakfast, TV's on, eating dinner, TV's on.
24/7, baby.
It's nice.
Well, I really admire the way that they did things.
Yeah,
and
it speaks a lot to.
I think we should cut back on some of our screen time for our kids. But anyway, so the boys obviously spent tons of time outside. Like we said, they would climb trees and soon they would end up jumping off cliffs into shallow water, which that sounds a little scary. But hey, they lived life fully. They were, always doing something. Now, their family was not religious, but had a real sense of duty and direction. Both grandparents and uncles on either side of the family served in World War II and Korea, and their war stories really captivated the Tillman boys. But Mary made it very clear to her kids they would never join the military. Although the family considered themselves to be atheists, they were curious about the belief systems around them, which I think is one of my favorite things about Pat, is he was so open to other religions and liked to learn. I mean, he would literally spend his spare time reading the Quran, the Bible, and other religious texts, and even read the Book of Mormon. And after he read that, he bought the Book of Mormon for himself and an assistant coach so they could read it together and discuss their ideas.
Yeah, that's really cool.
That was one thing I came across in the Sports Illustrated article about Pat's life. Is a lot of people talked about how Pat would not only encourage discussion about things he didn't understand, like religion, but he would try to get other people to be on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
By like doing book clubs or whatever, and then push their ideas or like talk to people if they were believers, just so he could kind of test out his own ideas about whatever it was. And that's just like so fucking cool.
That's even something that some of the people he served with talked about. It's specifically, there's one person we'll bring up who was a Mormon, and Pat spent a lot of time with him trying to understand the ideas. And this guy went up to him and was like, if you have any questions, let me know. And they would just spend their time talking about it, which, I mean, he was through and through a atheist, but it's so interesting that he was such an open
I feel like it's
person.
rare. It's rare to see an atheist be so open in wanting to learn and discuss other religions. Obviously, they're out there, but I feel like that's just such a cool thing.
Yeah,
to be
really
open
is.
to, at least learning about it. Not just turned off by it or closed to it. Speaks a lot to his character, I think.
I agree.
Imagine a burglary at your home. If you're picturing a shady character sneaking about under the cloak of night, you may be surprised to learn that according to the FBI, well, most break-ins happen in broad daylight. And they spike during the summer because people are gone on vacation and leave their homes unattended, and the days grow longer. That's why you need Simply Safe Home Security now. Simply Safe is the only home security company that we trust with our home and family's protection, offering us peace of mind whether we're home or away. One of the things that stands out to me is obviously the technology. The cameras are absolutely fantastic, really high quality, none of that fuzzy resolution stuff. This is crystal clear, so you can always keep an eye on your home away or just at home. Sometimes you want to just peek on the outdoor camera, see what your dog's doing in the backyard. So if you go to the website, simplysafe.com/milehigher, you can actually build your own system based on whatever specifications you want, or you can take their quiz and they'll help recommend a setup for you. But I love that you can truly get a setup for a home of any size, even in an apartment, which is amazing because everybody wants home security. Everybody wants to feel safe while they're home or away, and Simply Safe has got you covered. You'll never be locked into a long-term contract, so you can cancel any time, which is also a huge perk. Pricing is transparent and affordable at less than $1 a day with no hidden fees ever. With Fast Protect monitoring and LiveGuard protection, SimpliSafe agents can act within 5 seconds of receiving your alarm and can even see and speak to intruders to stop them in their tracks, which that's a great deterrent right there. If somebody's breaking into your home, all of a sudden someone starts talking to them through the cameras, I think most people are going to stop what they're doing and leave. Best of all, SimpliSafe is easy to install and activate. You can do it in less than an hour, or you can choose professional installation to have a pro do it for you. We love it. We know you'll love it. Go at least check it out. It's way more affordable than you think it might be. You can protect your home this summer with 20% off any new SimpliSafe system when you sign up for Fast Protect monitoring. Just visit simplisafe.com/milehigher. That's simplisafe.com/milehigher, because there's no safe like SimpliSafe.
So when he became a teenager, he started taking some more risks, as we all do. And once he fell from a 20-foot tree that was outside of his front yard and thudded onto the concrete beneath. But a neighbor watched this happen and just saw him groan, stand up, dust himself off, and climb the tree again. And I feel like that's a good example of the kind of guy that Pat was. He attended Leland High School and joined the varsity baseball team, but was cut shortly after his freshman year. He then turned his eyes to the football team, which many found strange because he was certainly muscular, as you can tell from his photos, but he was only 5'9". So that's kind of on the shorter side for many football players. However, he wanted to be a running back, which is a position that typically has shorter players. So it's kind of a perfect fit. And although in every interview with Pat, he came across as extremely humble, he occasionally spoke about how he thought he was meant for something bigger. Pat was also a lifelong journal keeper, which I also think says a lot about someone if they journal. When he was 16, he wrote, quote, "I consider myself an atheist. However, in the back of my mind, I wonder if there is something greater. I feel as though I am destined for something Gothic or elite, some state in which I have achieved all that can be achieved, glory, prestige, peace of mind, nirvana. Obviously, I won't know if my intuition is worth a shit until I'm dead. Therefore, I do not believe in preaching. I do not know the answer, so I cannot state my hypothesis as truth. My hypothesis isn't even educated. It's more like a stab."
God, I love that.
I know, me too.
That is such a great quote. And
powerful.
if we all lived by those guidelines, our planet would be just so much better off.
I know, not pushing it onto someone else as if you have all the answers because it's the religion that you're attached to, or if you don't have a religion.
It's a hypothesis.
Right.
We're all just hypothesizing about everything.
Fucking knows.
Yeah. Well, nobody's died and come back and told us what happened.
Some would argue otherwise.
Also, like, imagine being that good of a writer and that introspective at age 16.
Yeah.
Bro.
No,
like,
at 16?
My journal at 16 was like, I mean, I don't need to explain, but you can imagine what my journal at 16 was like.
Mine was boys, 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 boys.
Mine too. No, I'm joking.
But yeah, Pat was always expanding his mind and was really politically progressive as well. While in college, he asked his coach if he had ever coached any gay players and what he thought of them. And the coach said that, quote, "If they play football, I love them." To which Pat responded, "Good, good." And Pat would go on to be an ardent supporter of LGBTQ rights in his life. So I loved learning that about him as well. And around this time, Pat finally asked out his lifelong love. And their story is so cute. Her name is Marie Ugenti. The two of them first met on the same soccer team when they were only 4 years old. So really just such a adorable story. Even though Pat immediately had a crush on her, he didn't start dating Marie until senior year. And friends speculated to biographer John Krakauer that he finally asked her out once he got taller than her, which kind of was the way of things back in the day. I remember that kind of stuff too. But Marie quickly learned about his need for excitement, some danger, and truth. You know, he was always seeking the truth. There was one time where he was with his friends Anne Marie at Lake Tahoe, and he let them talk him out of jumping off of a 60-foot cliff into the lake. And it ate him up inside so much that he returned 2 weeks later alone and did the jump facing backwards. So definitely a daredevil. He was also known for driving 75 miles per hour on the highway with his friends and then suddenly asking a friend to take the wheel for him. Then he would climb through the window onto the roof and enter through the passenger side window, which is insane. Do not try that at home. Do not recommend. But yeah, just total, adrenaline seeking type of person. His mother, Mary, described Pat as, quote, the most respectful gutter mouth that you've ever met, the politest man to reach across at a restaurant table and dunk his sticky hands into your glass of water. So playful and so serious, so transparent and so mysterious, so kind and so frightening, so loud and so silent, so at ease with himself that he could meet you wherever you were. Really beautiful words there. Then when Pat was 17, his sense of duty was tested for the greatest time before his eventual enlistment. Pat had been really protective of all of his friends, but specifically his friend Jeff, who had already had over 12 operations on these cancerous moles across his head. And Pat was very secretly sensitive. He cried when he would see homeless people, and brought his childhood stuffed animals and blankets to training camps in the NFL. For him, Jeff was someone who deserved to be protected. He's just a really good friend. So one time, Pat had been drinking at a party and was out getting pizza when someone rushed in and told him that Jeff was getting jumped in the parking lot. So Pat immediately drops everything, rushes out to the lot, and started fighting this man in his early 20s who hadn't initiated the fight with Jeff. But Pat really beat the fuck out of this guy. He knocked out several of his teeth and left him lying on the concrete. And everyone else dispersed, fearing the cops might get called, but Pat remained, which I think says a lot about him. He felt really responsible for beating this other guy up, and even went and gave him his phone number. So that night, the Tillmans got a call. The young man had been hospitalized with a severe head injury, in addition to missing teeth, and he had been vomiting all night. So it was really, really bad. And Pat faced a felony assault charge, and any potential football scholarships would be impossible. So Mary had actually just inherited $40,000 from her grandmother's death and wanted to pay off the young man's family, but Patrick Sr. insisted that Pat had done the right thing and that he should have to face the consequences. This argument would actually be one of the many disagreements that led to their eventual divorce 2 years later. Pat was so upset with what he had done that he climbed to the top of a tree and stayed there for hours. Pat ended up pleading guilty to felony assault, checked into a juvenile detention center a few days after his high school graduation, and then served 30 days there, in addition to 250 hours of community service. After the Tillmans had paid $40,000 in damages, the charge was wiped from Pat's record, and he was allowed to attend ASU on a football scholarship in the fall.
What a series of events.
I know. His life is so interesting.
They always say actions speak louder than words.
Yeah.
And I think he is truly a true representation of that quote. He could have, there's so many other decisions he could have made that I think most of us would have done, right? Most of us in that situation would have left that guy and just ran off, didn't want to get caught. But he's like, no, here's my phone number.
Yeah, because he knew, it was really like a case of mistaken identity. This guy, it wasn't actually him that was involved. So he felt horrible.
It's incredible that he was willing to do that.
At that age, yeah, it's super impressive.
Yeah. Very mature, very mature thing to do. While at Arizona State University, Pat made a name for himself as the team's second best tackler. Even though he was relatively small for a football player, he wasn't a starter for the team until his junior year, but after that, they couldn't get him off of the field. While in college, Pat studied marketing, graduating with honors and a 3.8 GPA. Marie, who had stayed in California, remained his girlfriend, and the two stayed faithful even when they lived long distances. In Pat's senior year, he had the highest tackles on ASU's team and was named the Pac-10 Defensive Player of the Year. Still, he got very little notice from the NFL. But the Arizona Cardinals drafted him as a 7th-round pick as a hometown hero, but didn't expect him to do much for the team. He was given the league's minimum, which in addition to his bonus was still over $200,000, so still pretty good pay, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And he only started in 10 games in his first season. But still, Pat made a name for himself even from the sidelines. During training camp, another rookie was hung from the field goal as part of a hazing ritual. Pat saw him get tied up, then went and grabbed some scissors without anybody knowing, and then cut the rookie down. None of the older players said a word. When Pat returned home, he told a friend, quote, "People are going to know who I am. And the friend responded, quote, "Relax, Pat, you're a 7th rounder." 2 years later, Pat set a franchise record with 224 tackles, which if you don't know anything about the NFL or, tackle counts, that is very, very high.
Is it? I was going to ask you.
Yeah, I would want Pat Tillman on my fantasy football team for sure.
Your teams?
Yes,
Josh has like 8
my
teams
mini
normally.
teams. Yes, I take fantasy football very seriously. Quite good at it. But anyways, setting a franchise record, obviously people are going to start to take notice in the league. And, they're like, all right, this guy's actually good. He may be small, but this guy completely lights up other players. I mean, just the velocity, like if you watch highlights of Pat, dude hit hard. Like he's like a missile coming at you.
Damn.
And it wasn't necessarily that he could like chase somebody down. Because like when it comes to football, everybody oohs and ahs at like the ultra athletic players or certain player like DK Metcalf. They're just like physical specimens. You're like, how is this guy so tall, so buff, so athletic? And Pat Tillman, he's a big dude, but he is small in comparison to many other football players, especially in the position that he played. But yet it was also, it's interesting because I think everybody thinks football is just about the physical game, but it's just as much about the mental game and being football smart is what they call it, and knowing the other team's playbook. So of course, Pat, he'd go and study all the playbooks for all the other teams. So he would know what plays are about to happen, and then he would know how to approach that play and absolutely blow it up. And I think that's what made him really successful as a football player, is that he did all that mental work. So he was just so smart on the field. He knew like what angles he was going to take to get to the player that he knew was going to get the ball, and then just absolutely destroy the play. But anyways, in 2001, Pat Tillman was offered a $1.8 million 5-year contract with St. Louis, but he ended up turning that down so he could stay with the hometown team, the Cardinals.
Because money was not a motivator for Pat. It doesn't seem at all.
No, it doesn't seem like he really saw value in having a lot of money at all. And, on the team, he was known as foul-mouthed, intelligent, but very, very humble. I love this. And this is so cool about him is, when you think of NFL players, obviously they make a lot of money and you always hear or see all these fancy cars that they drive.
Yeah.
And not all pro players like this. Like Jason Kelsey from the Eagles, it kind of reminds me of Pat a little bit. He's a very laid back guy, wears like flip flops. Meanwhile, his teammates are like dripping in Gucci and Prada and stuff. And he's just like rolling around in, flip flops and some cutoff jeans.
Such a cool dude.
But Pat would ride his bike into like the team's parking lot, and like park it next to teammates' BMWs and Bentleys and stuff. And just didn't seem to care about that at all. He was just like, I'm here to do my job, to play football at the highest level. Anytime he was interviewed about a great performance he had on the field, he would just be like, he's one of those players who's be like, oh, the team's great. He never would make
it about himself.
And yeah, exactly. And I love players like that. There are a lot of players in the NFL that are like that. And I always love those guys because I just think it's cool to see somebody be so humble and
kind of like our boy Kirk Cousins.
Kirk Cousins. Kendall and I are Kirk Cousins fans.
Yeah, he is like that. Yeah. He also reminds me of Luke Kuechly. You remember for the Carolina Panthers?
Oh my gosh, yes, of course I remember him. He's so fun to look at. I love that man.
He retired though because of CTE concerns because he got so many concussions.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a great team player, which football's a team sport. It's not, there's no I in team, right?
Which, I just like to make this point. The Cardinals during this time were actually, even when he was being offered this contract with St. Louis, were actually like on a pretty terrible losing streak.
Oh, really?
But he was still excellent. Like he was still an excellent player. So the fact that he still turned down that contract to stay with his team and then also said like, oh yeah, no, my team's the best. Yeah. But they were losing the whole time is just so sick. Like he's so sick.
I know. I love this guy so much.
Yeah, well, a lot of players, they hate losing. And they're like, I will go anywhere to win. And they will even oftentimes take a pay cut to go to a winning team because their team sucks so bad. And yeah, the Cardinals were terrible for a long, long time. And they're kind of been terrible last couple of years too. They've just been a struggle, I feel like, for the entirety of their existence. But
oh, poor Cardinals.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say much about the Broncos these days either. Broncos have been pretty terrible since Peyton Manning. But anyways, back to Pat. He could have played football forever. He said he could have a comfortable life, and he knew that the Cardinals were planning to offer him a $3.6 million contract the following year. But then 9/11 hit. And as it did to, I'd say, a majority of Americans, it really took a toll on Pat. He felt like his career on the field would be meaningless if people were dying overseas. So just a few weeks after Pat finally got married to Marie in May of 2002, again, his high school sweetheart, he and his brother joined the Army. And they were intent on becoming specialized Army Rangers, which those guys are badass. I mean, it is very difficult to become a part of any special ops unit. But Army Rangers, man, just hearing, I've love learning about the military because I just like to know what it's like to go through that, especially for some of those, special ops units. And it is insane. They'll make you go out and hike around in the jungle and sleep deprived. And I mean, they just put you under the worst conditions to train you and do all sorts of crazy, stunts and jumping out of airplanes, rappelling down sides of mountains and stuff.
God, yeah. Just for some context, like one of the first Ranger operations was during World War II during D-Day, and they were tasked with literally climbing just like a sheer cliff in order to get to an artillery position that would hit the other beaches, and so like. That's the standard the Rangers have set. So like just if you would consider like what the Marines are to the Navy, that's what the Rangers are to the Army. Like they're the guys who go in the smallest teams to the most danger effectively.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. I like that comparison.
Yeah. It's extremely dangerous job. I mean, there's no other way to put it. But while at the recruitment office, a drill sergeant yelled at Pat and Kevin before they signed their papers, and Pat yelled back and said, quote, "You're treating us like assholes, and we haven't even signed up to be treated like assholes yet."
I love that.
Welcome to the military. Pat's family took the news poorly. Mary had never wanted her boys to join the Army and actually started crying. Their youngest brother, Richard, said, quote, "Are you fucking crazy?" and then walked out of the house. But other people noticed Pat, the football celebrity, too. He received a letter from the Secretary of Defense, hate even saying his name, Donald Rumsfeld.
One of the worst humans ever.
Who watched Pat's career closely. And I think he even said this in a memo or in a letter or something. He even said, we need to keep an eye on Pat Tillman when he joined the military. So talking about Secretary of Defense was aware that Pat Tillman was in the military and was definitely privy to what he was up to. Just something to keep in mind as we go further into this story. But Pat learned how the U.S. government marketed celebrity soldiers, and he did not like that. He's like, I just want to be treated like everybody else. Don't treat me differently. Plus, he knew that the Department of Defense had a contract with the NFL to run recruitment ads, and he knew that they would try to make him a poster boy for that.
Of course.
The Army even offered Pat a job in Washington to help with recruitment since the Rangers were often the first on the front lines and didn't want the star to be harmed. Pat turned them down and refused to do any interviews after enlistment, fearing that the government would use it to increase recruitment numbers. And you know damn well they would have if he had let them. And that was Pat's first wish, which the government ignored. The Cardinals had recorded previously unaired interviews with their players a day after 9/11, and when Pat's enlistment was made public, they gave the interview to NBC as part of their contract with the Department of Defense. And we have a clip of that, which we'll show you now.
It's like anything, you kind of take it for granted, especially in the country we live in. We are such a free society, and we look at that flag, and I've always had a great deal of feeling for the flag. But even someone who considers themselves that way, you just don't think about it all the time. You don't realize what it gives. You don't realize how great a life we have over here. Even as athletes, we bitch and moan every now and again about this or that. And if we ever to just, times like this, you stop and think about just how, not only how good we have it, but what kind of a system we live under, what freedoms we're allowed. And that wasn't built overnight. And it's kind of, the flag is a symbol of all that, the symbol of, my great-grandfather was at Pearl Harbor, and a lot of my family has given up, has gone and fought in wars. And I really haven't done a damn thing as far as laying myself on the line like that. And so I have a great deal of respect for those that have and what the flag stands for.
I wonder what his answer would be today if he were here, if any of that would have changed for him.
Philosophy behind it still rings true.
Yeah.
Like from a very basic perspective, I would agree with that even right now.
Yeah, I would too.
It is a symbol of the freedoms that we have here, and the system that which we live under. Is it perfect? No. Is there a lot of issues? Hell yeah. But the very fundamental rights that we have are not afforded to everybody else around the world. When he's like, I haven't done a damn thing. Even for me, thinking about that, I'm like, damn, I haven't done a damn thing. And other people pave the way for that. And when I really stop to think about that, it does bother me sometimes. I'm like, when I was younger, especially, right around 18, 19 years old, that, those recruitment ads definitely got me a little bit. I started looking into the Army Reserve. I was like, if I could find a way for the military to pay for my college, I would be willing to do military service. And you put me on a different path, which I'm thankful for. But I don't know that he would necessarily change the way he said that. I think obviously he would maybe elaborate on that. And be
that's what I'm saying.
He would probably elaborate, be like,
some of it still rings true for him, but
the political side of it.
Yeah.
When you look beyond just the fundamental rights and the fundamental ideas that he's talking about there, I think that's where, it kind of falls apart, right? Because it's like, well, is it really about that? Is it really about preserving freedom, or is there other motives for we're going to war? Why?
That's what I was getting at.
Trying to, recruit people. So
I also think like that interview was taken on 9/12, literally. So
yeah, that's a good point.
He hadn't fully come to the decision, like, I'm going to join the Army. It was more just like emotions super high.
Yeah.
I feel like if he actually did give an interview, which of course he didn't want to, but if he did, I'm certain he would have given that more nuanced response that like we would expect of him nowadays. But
Yep, I agree.
But that interview didn't fully explain Pat's reasoning for joining the military. In reality, he was deeply critical of the Bush administration. And while he joined to take part in the invasion of Afghanistan, he'd be entirely at odds while the invasion of Iraq the following year and the first military operation Pat was forced to take part in. Once the interview was aired against Pat's wishes, he told Marie that he did not want a military funeral if he were to die in combat, and that he did not want a religious service at all. He didn't want to be made out as a soldier who died for God and country. He joined for personal reasons, rather. He didn't want to make millions every year while men his age died overseas. So he turned down that $3.6 million contract in exchange for the Rangers' $18,000 a year salary, and arrived at Fort Lewis in Washington in December 2002. Kevin and Pat joined the same platoon known as the Black Sheep, and their arrival at basic training was a big deal for some of the men. Most of these guys had joined before 9/11 and had finished Ranger School and were itching for combat. The men said, quote, "He's nothing special. I'll make him do push-ups." And that dude was stupid to give up football. Everyone except for Russell Bear. Russ had joined 2 years earlier and was unusual as far as Army Rangers went. He was studious, wrote poetry, and kept his passion for writing hidden from most of the other men. He assumed that Pat and Kevin were just going to be a couple of meatheads, like the jocks he had avoided at high school. But after Pat and Russ started talking at the shooting range, Russ realized Pat was more like him than the other soldiers. They talked about the writings of Emerson and Allen Ginsberg, and Pat encouraged Russ to start writing poetry again. Pat and Kevin started calling Russ Bear, the same nickname that they had given their younger brother Richard, and Pat wrote about him in letters to his mother. Even after joining the military, Pat kept up his humble streak. When soldiers unaware of his past asked what he had done before joining, he would tell them that he had played for a college football team and never even mentioned the fact that he played in the NFL.
Yeah.
Which is like, wow.
Which I'm sure a lot of them probably knew because it was a pretty big deal when he joined, the media really.
Yeah, like turn on the news and, you hear about him.
Mm-hmm.
The Black Sheep shipped out to Saudi Arabia to take place in the initial invasion of Iraq in March 2003. Before the new recruits had fully completed Ranger School, the Black Sheep were ordered to a hospital near Baghdad to help rescue Private Jessica Lynch. Jessica's story had been widely reported on back home, and according to the media, her unit had been assaulted on both sides by enemy fire, and Jessica was the only surviving member of her unit, and she had fired her gun to the very last bullet. The Black Sheep were told by higher-ups that she was being held in a hospital by highly armed enemy forces, and that they would have to wait until the next day to storm the hospital and shell the surrounding area. That night, as Pat and Russ watched the shells land in the area around them, Pat said, quote, and this is an iconic quote from him, "This war is so fucking illegal." Already by that point, it was like immediately once he got over there, he was like, what the fuck is this?
Yep. I'm sure he wasn't alone in that. And what's crazy is in reality, Jessica Lynch never actually even fired her weapon. Her team had gotten lost while driving to Baghdad, and their Humvee broke down in enemy territory. They were assaulted, and her entire unit was killed other than her, but her gun had jammed, and she blacked out before she could pull the trigger. The Iraqi guard who captured her dropped her off at the hospital to be cared for by doctors, and not a single armed enemy was posted at the hospital. The Army knew all of this from the jump, but of course, they needed the patriotic narrative. The invasion of Iraq obviously was massively unpopular among American citizens, and they needed this story. What better than a 19-year-old soldier, especially a female soldier, who is rescued by NFL star Pat Tillman? What's worse is while they did blow up everything around the hospital, the real reason they waited until the next day to rescue Jessica was because they were waiting for a fucking camera crew to fly in to film the rescue. It's like shit like that just, puts it all into perspective.
Propaganda,
right?
baby.
Yep. So while the Rangers did destroy a lot of the hospital's equipment, the rescue was totally bloodless. The Iraqi doctors knew that the Rangers were coming and just handed over Jessica without a single shot. And after the overblown rescue, Pat told his bunkmate, Jade Lane, that he was worried that if he died, they would parade him around down the streets. In May of 2003, the Black Sheep returned home to Fort Lewis after completing their first tour in Iraq, and Pat and Kevin entered the final part of Ranger School training, which was 61 days of hard 20-hour days in the swamps of Florida. Sounds absolutely brutal. And for some initiates, the training caused members to lose an average of 16 pounds, induce hallucinations, cause skin disease, and even hair loss. And even if they saw combat, half of all the candidates did not make the cut. Pat and Kevin passed, along with Russ and most of their platoon. But as you can imagine, Pat was really getting restless. He hadn't gotten to go home or see any live fire either, so he was just stuck in the barracks gossiping until they were reassigned. Now, during this time, Bob Ferguson, who was the Seattle Seahawks general manager, worked out a deal with the Army through their NFL contract. They had agreed to let Pat end his duty early and play for the Seahawks for around $1.6 million. But once again, Pat turned this offer down. He still had 1 year left with the Rangers, and they were finally headed to Afghanistan. The Black Sheep were assigned to Khost, which is a mountainous region in southeastern Afghanistan, and their daily routine consisted mainly of inspecting a group of villages per a higher-up order. And if they didn't complete the assigned number of inspections, the higher-up would be reprimanded. 2 weeks into their tour, the Black Sheep were ordered to investigate villages along a canyon road with high cliffs on either side of Spira. The Black Sheep began driving their convoy along this road on April 22nd, 2004. Now, the night before, one of the Humvees had busted a fuel pump, and a new one was airlifted to them that morning, but the vehicle still wouldn't start. So they tried strapping the vehicle to another Humvee and towing it, but they moved at around 5 miles per hour, so not great there. And the Rangers had to think, since this was a perfect ambush spot from above. I mean, they're kind of just out in the open. David Uthlot, the Black Sheep's first lieutenant, emailed the base and requested that the Humvee get airlifted so that they could continue. However, the higher-ups at the base told them that all available air support was busy in Iraq. David then asked if they could abandon or blow up the Humvee. But since the vehicle was $50,000 and the officers at the base were fearful that Taliban fighters could salvage it, they denied him. David finally asked if they could remain at camp, and he was dismissed again. They had to finish their checklist.
Which, I just want to make a note that, this is all because a higher up wants to get promoted. The guy at base knew that if they blew up the Humvee, he would be the one reprimanded for it. And if they didn't investigate this last village, he would get reprimanded for it. And he wanted more money. So that is ultimately why they made the decisions that they made.
So a local Afghani man with a truck actually offered to tow the Humvee back to the main highway behind the platoon where they could meet with Army reinforcements. The officer at the base agreed to let him help, but they still needed to get to the last village. They ordered the platoon to split in half. Serial 1 would move forward to the town, and then Serial 2 would bring the Humvee back to the main road. Now, Pat was in Serial 1 with Russ, and Kevin was in Serial 2. Important to note. Pat's group continued forward. However, they missed the turn into the village and pulled over alongside the road to get their bearings. Serial 2 realized that the Afghani truck driver could not move the Humvee. Instead of turning around, they moved forward. And due to the canyon, they could not relay this information to Pat's group as their radios couldn't get a signal. Suddenly, Serial 2 started receiving fire from up above the canyon. This is disputed, and all of this gets a little confusing. As Army investigators later noted that no shrapnel or bullets actually hit the vehicle, but Serial 2 believed that they were under attack and started firing at the canyon walls. Pat heard the gunfire from above and asked David if he could run forward and engage the enemy, and also if he could take off his body armor so that he could run faster. Now, David did not allow Pat to take off his armor, but did allow him to take an Afghani soldier and an 18-year-old Brian O'Neill closer to the perceived fight. When their small group was above Serial 2 on the cliff, the Afghani fighter began firing at the cliff on the opposite side of the canyon. A fire team in Serial 2 saw the Afghani fighter firing and didn't notice his old U.S. Army uniform. They fired 7 shots into his chest and killed him instantly. Pat and Brian immediately got down on the ground. Serial 2 continued firing on them. Pat tried to yell at them, but they couldn't hear him over the gunfire. Pat actually got the idea to throw a smoke grenade to indicate that they were friendly. And after a brief pause, they started shooting again. And at this point, they're totally freaked the fuck out. Beyond belief. Which there is a documentary. What's it called? I think it's called just the Pat Tillman story.
Tillman story, yeah.
It's really, really well done if you want to understand this all a little better, because it is very confusing. But the other guy he was with, O'Neill, he was the one I mentioned in the beginning who was Mormon and talked about all the great conversations that he had with Pat. But he talks about just how terrifying these moments were. Just, what the fuck are we going to do? They're going to kill us. It's your own team. What do you even do? So they're so desperate at this point that Pat starts shouting, "I am Pat fucking Tillman." And Brian just faced the ground as Pat was yelling, just hoping that they would survive. But then suddenly he heard a pain in Pat's voice and what sounded like water rushing down the hill. And Brian looked up and realized that Pat had been shot multiple times in the head. And when the firing stopped, the Rangers realized what they had done and they panicked. And Kevin, who was at the back of Serial 2, did not know that they had engaged the enemy. When he realized that Pat had been killed, he was devastated. And, people who witnessed this, Josh, you just listened to an interview this morning.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it's interesting to, kind of walk through the timeline, because this is, what you just heard is the timeline that's presented in the Pat Tillman story documentary. But I listened to an interview of another Army Ranger who was a part of Serial 2, so part of the unit that Kevin, Pat's brother, was in. And his story is interesting because it gives a perspective of what was going on in Serial 2. To provide a little bit more context, so this Army Ranger veteran is Brad Jacobson, and the way that he kind of tells this, after I heard it, kind of makes this story make a little bit more sense, because of course you're like, couldn't they see that these guys were in, see Pat Tillman next to this Afghani guy and be able to be like, oh, these are our guys. These are friendly. So his telling of the story is they're trying to go over some mountains. They're going to go set up a new base. And so they had all the Humvees packed up. They had just a local Afghani man driving a Jenga truck, is what they call it, a military semi, basically. And he was driving ahead of Serial 1, so Pat's unit. And that's ultimately why they stopped. And apparently this Afghani truck driver had tried to bail on them multiple times, had actually jumped out of the truck and tried to run off and leave. Because so Serial 2, after they had been separated, Serial 2 had run into an IED and blown up one of the Humvees, and one of their guys had died. And this was like as they were leaving. This is before they got to the canyon. This is as they're leaving because they're going over the Hindu Kush mountains basically, and it's like a rough road, rough trail. It's single lane, so there's not a lot of room to maneuver.
Right.
And Brad, who's in Serial 2 with Kevin, they finally get going, and Serial 1's already up ahead, already stopped. They're stopped because of the truck. He said that all of a sudden they heard a loud explosion, Serial 2, as they're entering the canyon. And he claims that mortar rounds started coming down into the canyon, because the whole thing that happened was in prior days to them even heading off to the canyon, basically they had tried to go up one time and realized that because usually when they move in the middle of the night.
Right.
And so they had tried to leave, like it was either the previous night, I don't remember the exact dates timeline, but they had tried to leave. They started going up the mountain to where they ultimately, go through this canyon to get to where they're trying to go. And the terrain was so rough that like the truck driver had kept like going off the road and sliding, and like it was a complete nightmare. So they turned around and came back. Well, then all the Army Rangers were worried, because they're like, there's this village, there's probably Taliban hiding out in this village. They just saw us try to go up this road, and now they know that that's the path that we're going to take. So they all started talking. They're like, we need to be careful because there could be an IED placed on the path that we're trying to travel. And that's exactly what happened. Was they went up that road again, and an IED goes off, blows up one of the Humvees. And so then, they continue up this road, and then that's when they enter the canyon. They have no contact with Serial 1, which is Pat's unit. And he claims that they are receiving small arms fires coming down into the canyon. So somebody's shooting at them, and that there's mortar rounds coming down. And so they're getting out of the vehicle. They're trying, they're returning fire. They believe they're under attack. And the difficult part of it was this was twilight, dark enough that it'd be difficult with the naked eye to make out what you're actually looking up on the cliffs above them, because this is a very vulnerable position for anybody to be in. Especially for these guys, because they don't have the high ground. They're in the kill zone is what they call it. And so they have no idea what they're looking at up above them. And so they're like, all right, we've got to get out of this area. And that's what's kind of like disputed is, were they actually attacked? Was there actually enemy fire at any point during this whole incident? And that's what I'm still confused about, is like, were they actually ever attacked by the Taliban, or was this something else? Did somebody accidentally fire their weapon off or something like that? This guy, who is part of Serial 2, claims that no, we were definitely attacked. There was small arms fire going off. There was mortar rounds going. So we were like, we got to get the fuck out of here. We got to keep going down this canyon because we're in it now, and now we got to get through. And so everybody was already firing off their weapons at the cliffs, because stuff was coming down at them. So they were already in a heightened state. They had just previously dealt with the IED explosion of the Humvee, and one of their comrades died. So tensions are high. They're extremely anxious, and he's like, fight or flight's kicking in. He was a mortar man, so he was like in charge of setting up the mortar weapon and firing those off. So they continue down, and everybody, by the time they get to where Serial 1 is, and they are just blindly firing off into the canyon, he claims that he heard one of his superiors say, "Hey, those are friendlies. We got friendlies here." And he said that just like in the heat of the moment, and it was difficult to see out there. You couldn't put night vision on because it wasn't dark enough. So everybody's just kind of like blind to what's going on around them. But everybody's just like firing off their weapons because they believe they've just been ambushed by Taliban fighters. It wasn't until they finally got to Pat's unit, Serial 1, and all of their empty and their Humvees, and then realized, oh shit, have we been firing at our own guys? And by that point, they were extremely close. And we'll get into a little bit more of the evidence around like the investigation that follows this. But it's very confusing because even hearing his story, from his own personal experience, I mean, this interview was done almost like 19 years after this whole incident happened. So it's hard to say. Maybe he just doesn't remember things correctly. He was 19 at the time.
Yeah.
But his recollection of the events is very different from what we kind of went through. And that's kind of the version that ultimately gets told once everything kind of comes out. So it's very unclear at to which point did they actually encounter enemy fire, or did somebody just like accidentally fire something off or some type of explosion went off. They thought maybe it was an RPG or something that was being shot at them. So they weren't sure, like a rocket launcher, basically.
Yeah.
Because he said that the explosion was massive. He was like, it shook the whole valley. It was like, it just like caught them off guard. But he did say that everybody was just like firing off at whatever. And part of the story, he was like, one of our guys, he was like a seasoned veteran, just was like casually walking down the canyon path ahead of them. I don't see anybody. So he's like, I'm not going to fire my weapon. Well, he wasn't firing his weapon or anything. And he was just kind of walking around. But all the other guys were just like, where are they at? Where are they at? And just like whatever shadows they saw on the cliff faces, they just started shooting at it. So I think, and that's what's difficult, is because ultimately find out that there's no evidence they were fired upon by enemies because nobody else was hit. There wasn't like bullet holes in the vehicles or anything. And that's what's so bizarre about it, is this guy, Brad, he swears that he was hearing mortar rounds hit this cliff or the bottom of this cliff area that they're in, canyon area that they're in. But I don't know that the evidence necessarily backs that up. So it's very crazy. But he did say that he remembers once Kevin found out that Pat had been hit, he remembers hearing a blood-curdling scream and it was Kevin. And Kevin, obviously was just like beside himself figuring out what happened. And I think part of it was somebody mistook the Afghani guy that was with Serial 1 as the Taliban, fired at him, and Pat happened to be next to him. And just in the heat and like in that moment, I mean, he was next to him, he was with him when that happened. And, Pat was trying to get their attention. But again, there was no way to communicate with them. But I don't know. It's very weird because we'll get into a little bit more. It's like they get very, very, very close to the position that Pat was in. And Pat's yelling, "I'm fucking Pat Tillman." But again, guns are going off, machine guns are going off. You're not going to hear anybody yelling. I think the lighting conditions had a lot to do with this situation. That was just difficult for them to see.
That makes a lot of sense. The dusk is kind of like the worst time for something like this.
The other issue is that in some of the investigations, they say that it wasn't at dusk. It was like broad daylight. It was like
really
5 p.m. You could have seen. But then in other times, some of the investigations, they said it was nighttime. It was like night. And then other times they say it was at
So no one really fucking knows.
It's just, we will talk about it, but just there were too many investigations done by too many people with ulterior motives in an attempt to excuse the actions of the Rangers. I'm of the opinion it definitely sounds like an accident, like regardless. But when you look at the fact of like shot 3 times in the head, you have to have pretty decent lighting conditions for that, unless you're just an incredible shot, which maybe the guy was.
Could have been, yeah.
But,
yeah, that's a good point.
And on the subject of the Afghani soldier, like, he was in 1980s military fatigues, and he was using an AK-47, which is the weapon of the Taliban. The U.S. Army does not use the AK-47. So from that alone, that's why I understand this to be like an accident. Like, they saw that guy and they were like, okay, everyone who's with him is also an enemy.
Yeah, which I think most people are on that side, that it was an accident. But I mean, there definitely are theories that it was purposely planned, and there are people that think, which I kind of understand where they're coming from. I disagree, but part of the propaganda to have Pat specifically killed because it would make these huge headlines and he sacrificed his life and X, Y, and Z. And I see where people are going with at that point. But yeah, I fully agree with you. I think this was definitely a horrible accident. I can imagine how those men felt. And what's even more fucked up is all of the Rangers were ordered not to tell Kevin the truth about what happened to Pat. And, he had to spend a bunch of time with them going forward and workouts and this and that. And
which Brad Jacobson, if you listen to his interview, we'll link it below. I highly recommend listening to it because it's very interesting to hear.
I want to check that out.
His perspective. He straight up says, he's like, we were all extensively interviewed. We were all pulled separately and all told to not tell anyone about this.
Yeah, of course.
And that this is the official story. This is what really happened. It is a horrible, horrible accident that this happened. And everything that they were dealing with in that moment, he's like, I'm not surprised that this happened. Like this, we had just lost a guy. Mm-hmm. He was blown to bits by an IED in the Humvee, one of their buddies. This is kind of interesting. I'll just put this out there because I just thought I found it fascinating too. So Army Rangers do 3-month stints, 3-month tours.
Yeah.
And then they're relieved. Well, because of the invasion of Iraq, there was nobody coming to relieve them. So prior to this whole thing happening, everybody's going stir crazy. They're not really doing anything. The higher ups don't know what the fuck is going on. They don't know what they're doing. And they keep telling them like, yeah, we're trying to get somebody, get a unit to come relieve you guys, but it's going to be 3 more months. And he was saying that like everybody was getting super depressed and was just getting like, what are we doing? Are we going to actually see any action? Are we going to do anything? And, they had all been told that you guys could potentially be here till Thanksgiving or even through the end of the year. So they were all bumming out about that. They were all like, oh my God, like
stuck. I'm sure many of you out there have heard of third eye blind, but have you ever heard of 3-day blinds? Well, if you haven't heard of them, let me tell you, if you are looking for blinds, shades, and drapery, look no further than 3-day blinds. They have got this on lock. Now, I am one of those people who needs to sleep in complete darkness, even the littlest sliver of light peeping in, or, a little light on the fan. That ain't gonna cut it for me. I really need to have pure darkness. And so, if you're like me, consider upgrading your blinds, shades, and drapery. 3-Day Blinds is the leading manufacturer of custom window treatments in the United States. And right now, guys, they are offering a buy one, get one 50% off deal. So there is no better time to shop for blinds. And we can shop for almost anything at home these days. So why not shop for blinds at home too? 3-Day Blinds has local, professionally trained design consultants who have an average of 10 plus years of experience that provide expert guidance on the right blinds for you right in the comfort of your own home. Just set up an appointment and you'll get a free, no obligation quote the same day. And if you're not very handy like Josh and I, the expert team at 3-Day Blinds handles all the heavy lifting. They design, they measure, they install so you can sit back, relax, and leave it to the pros. And I was just checking out 3-Day Blinds Instagram account, and let me tell you, they got some fine looking blinds, friends. So don't miss out. When it comes to home renovations, we all have questions. What blinds should you get to cover an arched window? Maybe it's time to upgrade to motorized blinds. What blinds are better, roller shades or Roman shades? I don't even know what Roman shades are, but I'm sure 3-Day Blinds could tell me. No matter your unique need, from motorization to home automation to room darkening or maybe even child safety, with 3-Day Blinds, you can choose from thousands of options to fit any budget or style with actual samples, so you won't be guessing about what your blinds are going to be looking like. 3-Day Blind has been in business for over 45 years, and you may not hear it in the name, but they make incredibly high-quality products. That's why they are the highest-rated blinds company on Trustpilot with a 4.7 out of 5 stars. And we are actually 3-Day Blinds customers because all of our blinds here in our office space are from 3-Day Blinds, and we had a great experience. So right now you can get 3-Day Blinds, buy one, get one 50% off deal on custom blinds, shades, shutters, and drapery. For a free, no charge, no obligation consultation, just head to 3dayblinds.com/milehigher. That's buy one, get one 50% off when you head to 3dayblinds.com/milehigher. One last time, that's the number 3, DAY, blinds.com/milehigher.
All of a sudden, the higher ups tell them, we're going to go make this forward base. You're going to travel here. You got to bring your supplies, go set up this new base, but you're going to have to go through this path. And everybody in Serial 1 and Serial 2, Pat included, were like, this is a fucking bad idea. This is not safe. This is extremely dangerous. And then the fact that they split them up was another huge mistake that the higher ups made that should have never happened. They're already a small unit. To split them up just puts them at even more unnecessary risk. They had just gone through that IED blast. Their buddy is killed. They're all on edge, and then they enter this canyon, and something happens, explosion happens, and then just all hell breaks loose. And they didn't even realize they were fighting with their own men.
And so that's really hard to swallow. It's like you could have been that person that pulled the trigger. And I can't even imagine what those guys have to live with, every day, knowing that they were the ones that killed him.
I mean, we can't even do it justice, because it's just so insane to hear what these guys go through and what they see.
Yeah.
And
I definitely recommend
trying to put yourself in their shoes and imagine the mental state you'd be in.
You cannot possibly imagine.
After you just seen what you had seen.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're facing fire, potentially for the first time since you've been there. Explosions are going off. You're hearing, all of a sudden you're in fight or flight mode. And he's like, I understand why this happened.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It only gets worse from here, though. The day after Pat's death, the highest members of the military immediately got to work covering up the truth of how Pat was killed. Not only did the members of the Black Sheep know about friendly fire, but the generals and commanders also knew about it. Lieutenant Colonel James Bailey visited the site of Pat's death the following morning to investigate. He interviewed soldiers, surveyed the scene, and informed his boss, Colonel James Nixon, that Pat had been killed by friendly fire and that, quote, there was no doubt about it. There you go. Next day, he knew. Nixon informed the highest generals in the army the truth of Pat's death, but this wouldn't work. The American public had grown weary of Bush's wars in the Middle East, plus 60 Minutes had informed the army that they're going to air an expose on war crimes committed by U.S. soldiers at the Abu Ghraib prison camp. The Bush administration planned to use Pat's death as a counterpoint to raise support in the war, and friendly fire would, of course, only do the opposite. According to one Army official, Pat's death was, quote, a steak dinner served on a trash can lid. Like, what the fuck?
Just the most despicable fucking thing you can
It really is.
Yeah, about a man's death. Like, it doesn't matter, bro. You don't say that about anybody.
They first informed Marie Tillman, Pat's wife, of his death the following day. At first, she was told that Pat was killed in an ambush while exiting a vehicle. So she called Pat's mom, Mary, before an Army courier arrived to tell her in person. Mary told her to leave, saying that she already knew the news. But then that same day, the Bush administration put out a press release informing the public of Pat's death in Afghanistan. This violated a law that Bush himself passed that gave grieving families 24 hours of privacy after the death of a family member before the public knew about it. The Bush administration sent over 200 emails regarding the death of Pat Tillman and was intimately aware of the cover-up. General Stanley McChyrstal, who ran the Army Special Operations Branch, was probably the most involved in Pat's cover-up. He had engineered the rescue of Jessica Lynch and was working hard to spin Pat's story as patriotic. The day after Pat's death, McChyrstal was tasked with writing and expediting a Silver Star to be awarded to Pat posthumously. The Silver Star was not usually given to those who were killed in friendly fire, and McChyrstal knew the truth of Pat's death from the jump, but he's like, fuck it. This makes for a great story. This is a hero who gave his life for our country. If I give him this award, that'll only reinforce it. He also began an official Army investigation into Pat's death that day. While this was standard procedure, it would mean that they wouldn't have to reveal the truth until the investigators finished.
Even though the investigation would give like a gap in which they would have to officially like tell the family like, okay, Pat was conclusively killed by friendly fire, they still have an obligation to tell the family that an investigation was happening, and they did not do that.
Wow.
Kevin did not know about the initial investigation until he was back at Fort Lewis, and he spoke to the Army investigator, and the Army investigator spoke to him as if he already knew, and Kevin was like, wait, what? You're investigating my brother's death? I thought that was all known already.
Can you imagine finding that out?
Just like in the hallways from a guy you just bumped into.
Like, what do you mean it's under investigation?
my brother's a hero.
Yeah.
Like, that's what they're all saying.
When all the family wants to know is the truth. I mean, when you just lost a loved one like that, the only thing you want is the truth of what happened, right? It's just crazy that Pat literally predicted this.
That's what's the most eerie about
It's
it.
like
is
he knew.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, premonition that this happens. This is what they're going to do. And honestly, it's way worse. Not only are they going to attempt to try to parade him around, lie about it, lie about what really happened to America and to his family.
Well, I'm sure it was the last thing on his mind that he would die due to friendly fire, and then it would be lied about like that.
So meanwhile, Pat's body was taken to a field hospital. His clothes, body armor, and journal, get this, were all destroyed before they could be included in any official investigation.
They were burned.
Which, how sketchy is that?
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, even anytime someone is killed in the military, they will return everything, even if your clothes are completely soaked in blood.
As they should.
Yeah.
As they fucking should.
Especially his journals. And this is the one thing his brother requested, his journals. Kevin specifically asked, I need to be able to read my brother's last words. And, it was so important to him, these journals, he kept up with them. And they burned them.
That's just crossing the line to a whole other level. And I'm sure.
And why?
Yeah.
Why?
Probably because, especially in this scenario, I'm sure Pat had all kinds of thoughts about what was really going on over
for a little while. Yep.
And had all of this negative thoughts and feelings he had written down in there.
Yeah, they probably started reading them and then were like, oh, fuck, people cannot see this.
As soon as his family gets a hold of this and then find out we lied to them and that he was killed by friendly fire, they're going to release this to all the press, and this could be detrimental to our campaign.
Yeah, the American people catch wind of this and hear maybe some of the things that were going on that he wrote down. Yeah. But what I really don't understand is why they burned his clothing.
See, I also think that's for propaganda reasons because, for the same reason of like, if the public were ever to find out that he was killed by friendly fire and then you see the absolute just destruction to these clothes, like, because apparently, again, it was like,
yeah, that's a good point.
Like,
I see what you mean.
It was just like O'Neill said it was like water gurgling down a hill. Suddenly the public sees the capability of American firearms and what they can do to a human body. It's like, how could you not like continue supporting a war? Like, it's just at that point it becomes too real for people to see that,
especially in this time, right? With this discourse going on back at home. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually when you put it like that.
So later in 2007, the Defense Department released 2,300 pages of testimony to the Associated Press with disturbing accounts from the doctors who examined Tillman's body after his death. And they said, quote, that the medical evidence did not match up with the scenario as described. The doctors indicated that the proximity of the 3 bullet holes in Tillman's forehead were so close together it appeared he was shot by an M16 fired from 10 yards or so away, not the 50 yards or more as indicated in the initial report. There was also never any evidence of any enemy fire found on the scene, and no members of Tillman's group had been hit by enemy fire, as we kind of mentioned earlier. And in his final words before he was killed, Tillman told his comrade, who was also under fire, to shut up and stop sniveling, which I think that was the other thing that we wanted to mention. I think it was his Mormon comrade, because in the documentary, he mentions that he just started praying. He was just praying vigorously to God and, protect us. And
Pat said something along the lines of like, stop praying. God can't save you. You're the only one responsible for how this is going to unfold. Yeah.
In this moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Something like that.
It's also important to note that Army attorneys sent congratulatory emails to each other for keeping criminal investigators at bay while the Army conducted an internal friendly fire investigation, which resulted in administrative or non-criminal punishments. In the doctor's analysis of Pat's body after the fact, stating that those M16 wounds seem to be from 10 yards away. And again, like, some of that's subjective, and like, I know it can be difficult to figure out like exact ranges, but a lot of that science is pretty sound, right? When it comes to ballistics and how it impacts the human body. I mean, if that is in fact true, what the fuck does that mean?
I know.
Because I mean, that does lend credence to, was he murdered? Like, was he murdered? Like,
I know that part is, I don't know.
so going back to the whole fucked up shit the Army did as far as destroying his uniform and his belongings, they would later claim they did that because they were a biohazard.
Yeah.
And
What?
they were cut off of him in the process of giving him medical care. And again, if you remember, Pat was shot multiple times in the head. So why are they cutting off his clothes? At that point, he's clearly dead.
What?
And also,
like, what's the...
He was shot in the head.
Yeah,
Times.
right. So
what
why
medical
the body?
care is there to
Right.
give?
There is none.
Unfortunately.
They believe he died instantly.
Yeah.
Which maybe they were looking for other wounds or,
Just doing it.
just doing a examination possibly.
Mhm,
But still,
What?
no reason to then burn them.
No, if you cut them off, you can still just send them back the way
Put
that
it in
they
a
are.
biohazard bag and give it to the family. Like, let them decide what to do with that.
Yep.
Meanwhile, as part of a repatriation ceremony before Pat's body was brought back to the States, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Kaslarich wanted a chaplain to say prayers as part of the ceremony. Kevin Tillman, who's still on the base, informed Kaslarich that Pat was an atheist and wouldn't want prayers to be said over him. This pissed off Kaslarich, who was an evangelical. He reportedly told Kevin that this ceremony wasn't for him, it was for the men, and that there would be prayers.
What a fucking dick.
Dude.
If it's for anyone, it's for Pat.
Right.
If
He
Pat
just
doesn't
died.
want this,
Yeah.
then you don't have it.
And for his
Period.
family, too.
Yeah, but more than anything, for Pat.
For Pat. Agreed. Yeah, it's insanely fucked up.
If you remember Russ Bear, he was chosen to escort Kevin home along with Pat's remains. However, since he was not allowed to speak about the truth of Pat's death to Kevin, the two of them flew in complete silence, which imagine, like, I feel bad for Russ that he had to keep that quiet. And
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, some of the guys in the
such a
documentary, too,
horrible
talk about
position.
just how horrendous that was for them to have to do, ordered to do,
Yeah. So they're literally in this Army plane. It's just the two of them and then Pat's coffin covered with American flag. Back home, Marie was being pressured to allow for a military burial at Arlington for Pat's body. And after hours of coercion, Marie stuck to Pat's wishes and did not allow for a military funeral, which good for her. The Army settled on a memorial service in Pat's hometown of San Jose, where he'd be awarded the Silver Star. On April 29th, McChyrstal sent the Silver Star recommendation to the Secretary of the Army. That same day, he was alerted that President Bush was going to give a speech at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in which he was going to talk about Pat's death by enemy fire. McChyrstal, fearing that this could lead to problems if the truth of Pat's death was made public, sent a memo to senior officials, including Donald Rumsfeld and President George W. Bush, saying, quote, "Sir, in the aftermath of Corporal Patrick Tillman's untimely yet heroic death in Afghanistan on the 22nd of April 2004, McChyrstal stated that it is anticipated that a 15-6 investigation nearing completion will find that it is highly possible that Corporal Tillman was killed by friendly fire. This potential finding is exacerbated by an unconfirmed but suspected reports that the President of the United States and the Secretary of the Army might include comments about Corporal Tillman's heroism and his approved Silver Star medal in speeches currently being prepared. I felt that it was essential that you receive this information as soon as we detected it in order to preclude any unknowing statements by our country's leaders which might cause public embarrassment if the circumstances of Corporal Pat Tillman's death become public."
There you go. So they fucking knew.
Mm-hmm.
I want to point out the importance of him saying, if the circumstances of Corporal Tillman's
Yeah.
death becomes public.
Let's hope not, but
Mhm.
cover our asses just in case.
Yeah, fuck these guys, for real.
Yeah. That's an understatement.
Yeah. On May 3rd, 2006, Pat's family scattered his ashes along the beach in San Jose. Russ had been staying with them, but was still under orders not to disclose the truth about Pat's death.
Dude, can you imagine? Holy fuck. I wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, and also, like, Russ was he was known by the Tillman family. Pat wrote about him in letters home. They knew him. They were excited to meet him despite the circumstances.
Yep.
And still, he's around this family of a man he loved, and he can't tell them the truth. Like,
Yeah.
fuck, dude. That's horrible.
And it was interesting to listen to his parents talk about that. They seem to have kind of different takes on it. I can't remember who said what, but one of them was talking about feeling like deceived and angry about it, but the other was like had some sympathy. And
I think his mother
Yeah.
felt bad for
Yes.
Russ.
His dad was pretty pissed about, if I remember right. I don't know. It's, God, I don't know how I would feel. I mean, he's following orders and.
But morally?
I don't know.
I mean, talk about a moral dilemma.
I couldn't do it.
Obviously,
to be in their home.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Obviously,
God.
he knew that he'd be reprimanded big time for that.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah.
even completely kicked out.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. For me, it feels like that was a hero moment for him, that he could have been a hero, because he could have saved Pat's family months and just time and anguish and all the things that they had to do to fight to get the truth. And he could have given that to him. But
it's a position
hard to
that
say,
none
right.
of us have ever been in, and
No.
I can't even like comprehend.
No.
So it's
No.
hard to judge. But yeah, I don't even know what to say. It's just horrible either way.
But the Army memorial service was held in Pat's honor that same day. Navy SEAL Steve White, who had befriended Pat while overseas, was given the falsified speech written by McChyrstal to award Pat the Silver Star. The speech included vague statements such as, quote, Corporal Tillman put himself in the line of devastating enemy fire, which did not say any enemy directly killed him, but unknowing people would assume so.
Also, I just wanted to mention that Pat was also awarded a Purple Heart. I feel like that's, something that is worth mentioning as well.
Yeah, and the Silver Star, if I remember correctly, is up there towards the highest medals you can possibly receive.
It's the third highest.
The third,
Fifth.
right?
The fifth. Holy shit.
Is it the fifth?
Sorry. No, you're right. The third highest. Yep.
But during the service, John McCain spoke on stage and specifically said, and you will see him again when a loving God reunites us all. Which again, I think obviously that came with good intentions, but it's very offensive to his family who are atheists and don't believe that. There were other people as well that said things that I think it was just all, sent Richard really over the edge, his brother. And Richard actually got up and spoke. And I think we have his entire speech, or at least a good chunk of it. And I think we should just play it because he was very angry that all these people are up there offering prayers for his non-believing brother, saying he's with God. And so he went on stage and said this, and I loved this.
He was always giving gifts. Thanks, Pat. I didn't write shit. I'm not a writer. And I just want to say it was really amazing to be his little baby brother. Thank you for coming. Pat's a fucking champion. Just make no mistake, he'd want me to say this. He's not with God. He's fucking dead. He's not religious. So thanks for your thoughts, but he's fucking dead.
I don't regret any of that. As far as what I was thinking, I was just simply miserable. I was sad for my whole family. I was sad for my mom, my dad, Marie, Kevin. This isn't a production. It's my brother's service. I didn't plan on saying that. It just, he's not what these people wished he was.
And this ended up being a pretty big moment in the media. It went sort of viral for back then. And Richard later explained his actions on the Bill Maher show.
No, I found it offensive. It's like, I don't go to a church and say this is bullshit, so don't come to my brother's service and tell me that he's with God. He's simply not with fucking God.
So anyway, a few weeks after the memorial service, the Army concluded their initial investigation into Pat's death, and they concluded that some of the shooters, quote, could be charged with criminal intent and demonstrated, quote, gross negligence. And when the coroner couldn't rule out homicide and the report was to be made public, the Army finally, at that point, decided it was time to tell the Tillman family the truth. And this was over a month after Pat was killed. The report made note that there was no evidence of enemy fire and that Pat was shot from 10 to 35 yards away, meaning that the shooter would have had to know that it was him in broad daylight. Coroners also noted that the bullets that killed Pat were grouped so closely together that it was likely not an accident. But McChyrstal, who obviously didn't want words like gross negligence on his record, ordered a second investigation, and this one concluded that Pat was shot from 50 yards away at sunset. So Kazlerich, who our team is now calling Kazlerbitch.
Yeah, he deserves it.
Kazlerbitch.
He deserves it, especially
That's
when you
the
hear what
least-
he's about to fucking say
Yeah, he is
about Pat.
such a trash human. But yeah, he's the evangelical that basically was like, fuck what you guys want for the service. It's going to be our way or the highway. Anyway, he headed the second investigation to clear the army of criminal wrongdoing. And this investigation only lasted 1 week. When the second investigation concluded, Mary Tillman petitioned the Army to release the inquiry to her. And she was given 3,000 pages, which tons of it, thousands of words were redacted. So she ended up working with an ex-Delta Force veteran named Pete Blaber to determine what words fit into these blacked out spaces. She went outside to measure the distances. The investigation said Pat was shot at. And even at 50 yards away, Mary's brother could still see her earrings. Okay, so that really puts it into perspective. And then Mary began to suspect the worst, that Pat was killed intentionally by his own men, which we sort of brought up earlier. And obviously they're thinking this because he had made his opinions on the war in Iraq known, and also he had plans to meet with Noam Chomsky to advocate for the war's end. So could higher-ups have found this out and ordered his death? Or, the possibility that the death could have been great propaganda for them to really make something out of him as a war hero, to inspire others.
Man, the conspiracy runs deeper.
Yeah.
Because if I were his family, I definitely...
Your mind would go there, right?
Would think that that's a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Here's like a celebrity soldier who goes to war, finds out the truth of what's really going on over there, comes back and then goes on a campaign to try to end it. You know how bad that would look for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Especially
is that enough for them to allow war crimes?
It's the Bush administration.
It's been done before.
The American government, yeah.
Ah, man.
So Mary fired off 32 questions to John McCain and told a brigadier general, quote, "Are you fucking kidding me?" when their stories kept changing. And this led to a third investigation and then a fourth with no new information, just different accounts of the distance and light conditions at the time of Pat's death, which we also talked about a little bit earlier. Mary said, quote, "It's like Pat has died 7 times in my head. You think you're losing your mind for months. They attached themselves to his virtue and threw him under the bus. They had no regard for him as a person. He'd hate to be used for a lie. I don't care if they put a bullet through my head in the middle of the night. I'm not stopping." God, Mary is such a badass. I just am so amazed by her.
I would think that every parent would do this, if this was your child.
Most parents, yeah, probably.
This was your child.
But she really took it to the next level. She's just tough as nails. But the Army was getting frustrated with the Tillman family, obviously. They were just hoping that they would accept things as it was.
Yeah, they were really dumb to think that they would just be like, oh, okay. Okay, that's what you're telling us now? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But they are way smarter than that.
We'll do everything that you want.
But they had disciplined 7 Rangers involved in the shooting with pay cuts and dismissal to the regular Army, and they didn't know what would appease them at that point. They were kind of hoping after that they would just kind of give it up, but they certainly
what would
did
appease them is the higher ups be held accountable.
Yeah,
because that's really who's at fault here for even putting them in this position.
Meanwhile, Kozlerich, the same guy who forced a chaplain to say prayers at Pat's repatriation ceremony, said, quote, "When you die, there is supposedly a better life, right? Well, when you are an atheist and you don't believe in anything, if you die, where do you go to? Nothing. You are worm dirt. Worm dirt." That's what this motherfucker said. So for their son to die for nothing, and now he is no more, that is pretty hard to get your head around that. So I don't know how an atheist thinks. I can only imagine that would be pretty tough. Like that has anything to do with this.
Dude, if I was one of Pat's family members, I would be so pissed off hearing that.
And in response to this statement, Mary said, quote, "Pat may have not been what you call a Christian. He was about the best person I ever knew. He was just a good guy. He didn't lie. He was very honest. He was very generous. He was humble. He had an ego, but it was a healthy ego. It is like everything those people are. He wasn't." Patrick Sr., who wrote 2 letters after the 4th investigation, the first to the Brigadier General Gary Jones, who conducted the investigation, in which he said, quote, "Those on the ground had a sworn duty, and they were trained to positively identify whoever it was they were about to kill. People in other positions of authority, too, had a sworn duty, colonels, generals, attorneys, to do their job. We relied on all of you to exercise your duty, authority, responsibility properly, at least not maliciously, or pursuant to some bullshit agenda. Telling us the truth about how Pat died was the least you could do. Every one of you have disregarded your duty, acting deliberately and shamelessly to kill my son and lie about it. Then he wrote another letter to the Senate Armed Services Committee and said, quote, I assure you, no investigator worth a damn would have made the presentation I sat through unless they had an agenda different from the truth. The initial investigation was changed, conflicting testimony was disregarded, key evidence was destroyed and or omitted. Witnesses, probably with supervision of superiors, changed their testimony. No one has been confronted with their conduct. Patrick Sr. ended this letter saying, quote, in sum, fuck you and yours.
Period.
Go off, King.
It's sad that he even had to write these letters.
I know.
You know, but that was his only option, to try to get communication with these guys. But then this letter led to the fifth and final investigation by the Defense Department's Inspector General. And on March 26, 2007, they released their findings. They said that Pat's death was not the result of negligent homicide. However, they blamed three-star General Philip Kensinger for the cover-up. Though included in McChyrstal's initial letter, Kensinger had little to do with the cover-up. He was chosen as the fall guy because he was already retired. In the investigation, Kensinger referred to his bad memory 70 times to excuse his actions and those of other top military leaders. Then between April 24, 2007 and July 14, 2008, the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform held a series of panels with the Tillman family and government officials involved in the cover-up. It was here that Kevin finally broke his silence.
The most recent investigation by the Department of Defense Inspector General and the Criminal Investigative Division of the Army concluded that the killing of Pat was, quote, an accident. The handling of the situation after the firefight were described as a compilation of, quote, missteps, inaccuracies, and errors in judgment, which created the perception of concealment. The soldier who shot Pat admitted in his sworn statement that just before he delivered the fatal burst from about 35 meters away, that he saw his target waving hands, but he decided to pull the trigger anyway. Such an act is not an accident. It's a clear violation of the rules of engagement. Writing up a field hospital report stating that Pat was, quote, transferred to intensive care unit for continued CPR after most of his head had been taken off by multiple 5.56 rounds is not misleading. Stating that a giant rectangle bruise covering his chest that sits exactly where the armored plate that protects you from bullets is being, quote, consistent with paddle marks is not misleading. These are deliberate and calculated lies. Writing a Silver Star Award before a single eyewitness account is taken is not a misstep. Falsifying soldier witness statements for a Silver Star is not a misstep. These are intentional falsehoods that meet the legal definition for fraud.
And later, the committee questioned the recipients of McChyrstal's letter and former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Once again, it seemed like the higher-ups were dealing with cases of bad memory. We'll play some more of that here for you.
Who dropped the ball? The system didn't work, errors were made. That's too passive. Somebody should be responsible, and we're trying to figure that out. That concludes our hearing today, and we stand adjourned.
In the end, the House released this report, quote, the pervasive lack of recollection and absence of specific information makes it impossible for the committee to assign responsibility for the misinformation in Specialist Tillman's case. It is clear, however, that the Defense Department did not meet its most basic obligations in sharing accurate information with the families and with the American public. The Tillman family was devastated. While senior leaders in the military admitted to knowing the truth of Pat's death, they didn't give enough information for anyone to be held responsible. And to be able to just get off of being like, oh, my bad memory is such bullshit.
If I had it to do all over again, and we subsequently changed Army policy after this, because the intent on awards at that time was to do an award rapidly so that it could be presented to the family at the memorial service for their comfort. What we have learned since is it is better to take your time, make sure you get everything right with the award and not rush it. So I say that in the two things which I believe were entirely well-intentioned on my part, and in my view, everyone forward that I saw was trying to do the right thing, it still produced confusion at a tragic time. And I'm very sorry for that, because I understand that the outcome produced a perception that I don't believe was at all involved, at least in the forces that were forward.
Kensinger referred to his bad memory 70 times to get off of it. And he was retired. Like, they picked him and he was censured, which doesn't mean shit if you're retired. Like, it just meant that he didn't have to be included in any further investigations.
Unbelievable. And the same for Rumsfeld and all the other generals too. Like, oh yeah. And then they were complaining about fucking technology at their office not working, and like, oh, my assistant didn't get it to me, and just named every bad excuse you can possibly think of as to why they didn't know about this or how long it took for them to know about it. And it's just, when you watch those clips, it's just so obvious they're just fucking lying. And the House committee doesn't do anything. And ultimately, like, all right, thanks, gentlemen. Thanks for showing up, basically. Have a nice day. And meanwhile, Pat Tillman's family just has to sit there. And I think the camera pans to them a few times. You can just see how fucking pissed they are and disappointed, and just like, this was literally for nothing. Like, there is no point in having a House oversight committee if they don't fucking do anything. When this is one of those cases where it's like very, very clear somebody fucked up. People at the highest level in the military fucked up. But guess what? No, they get a pass because of bad memory.
Are we really surprised, though?
No.
That the U.S. military is getting a pass, especially all the higher ups. Like,
well, it's like, if your fucking memory's so bad, you shouldn't have this job.
Yeah.
Like, that's alarming to everybody that our generals have memory problems and they're running the entire fucking thing.
Yeah, that's great.
The military, yeah.
Like, the irony is unbelievable. After the final hearing, a senator approached Patrick Sr. trying to shake his hand. Of course, the cameras are there, and offer a prayer. And Patrick Sr. had to tell him multiple times. I'm sure he'd love to scream this at them, but he's like, get the fuck away from me. And the senator's like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm praying for you and your family. Like, fuck you, dude. Get the fuck away from me.
It's
and
so
Pat
show.
would be so fucking pissed about this whole
Disgusted
thing.
by
Here's
it
a
all.
guy that literally lived his whole life the way all human beings should live, open and accepting of everyone. And here's fucking people that are supposed to be upholding the Constitution, our freedoms, our liberties here in this country, and they're over here like trashing him for being an atheist, and then trying to force their religious beliefs onto his family.
And put on the little act for the public to
Right.
make it all look nice.
Oh, it's sickening.
It is. You wonder, like, in the afterlife, I always think, are we able to see things still down on Earth? Or
I know. I
like,
always wonder
could
about that.
Pat have seen any of this? Or like, what would he...
I understand where you're coming from, but his family's like, what do you talk? There is no after. He's in the fucking, he's dead
Right,
in the
yeah.
ground, and that's it. And if that's how
Yeah.
you believe, that is completely fine, and that should be respected. And there shouldn't be like this speculation or like this need to like try just because it makes everyone else feel better that this person died. But we'll send him prayers and he's with God now. And like, yeah, that's great for you.
But if you don't believe
if you
that,
don't
it means
believe that-
nothing.
yeah, exactly.
It means nothing.
Yeah,
It's
no,
insulting.
That's not what I was saying, but yeah, I just
It's
meant,
basically
like, what would he
like-
think of all of this if he was still
I'm
here
sure
to see
he'd
it? You
be
know,
disgusted.
Disgusted. Yeah.
Well, it's just so offensive, and it's like a dig at your intelligence when people try to say that to you. Is like, oh, you don't believe in God,
Especially
in the
to be like,
afterlife?
oh, you poor soul.
Yeah,
You're so lost.
right.
Can't imagine what it would be like to just believe that your loved one is in the dirt with the worms.
And that's why you can't accept what happened to him.
Yeah,
and-
that.
which is just, oh my God.
Fucking ridiculous. This whole case pisses me off so much.
But as far as the aftermath of all this goes, it's been 20 years since Pat Tillman was killed by friendly fire while serving in Afghanistan, and it's not all that uncommon.
Yeah. Side note here, between 2 and 20% of all American war casualties are the result of friendly fire, which is 2 and 20% is obviously...
Yeah, what kind of fucking range is that?
Well,
2
it
and
varies 'cause
20%?
obviously, like, the underreporting, and then the higher-ups, they don't want to face the consequences. So, like,
Yeah.
it's hard to tell, but if it was 20%, that's a lot.
That's
That's
a
fifth.
lot.
Yeah.
And that is extremely concerning. Even if it's 10%, I mean, 2% is even too high.
It's very interesting that the data specifically around that is so
Of
foggy.
course.
2 to 20%. We're not really sure. It's probably
What if
higher
it's
than
more?
20%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really could be. Very convenient for that statistic to be so foggy.
Yeah.
And I don't even want to know statistics on amount of civilians killed.
Oh my God.
You know,
it's
in
just-
war, it's just alarming. I mean, it's
No, the information that we actually get,
yeah.
it's fucking nothing.
Well, and it's like, I mean, thank God for the internet, right? Like it's allowed the general public to see. It's allowed the general public to see what war is really like and what's really going on, you know, on the ground. And, you know, there's been a lot of change in that regard over the years. But back in the early 2000s, I mean, it was like what you caught on the, you know, nightly news is what you saw and what you heard about the war. I mean, there wasn't all this access like there is now.
Okay, I just looked it up. It's worse than I thought. 90% of casualties in war are made up from civilians.
Jesus. That is nuts.
It's a 1-to-9 ratio.
Fuck, dude, that is bad.
Yeah, war's fucking terrible. Absolutely terrible.
So I'm sure many of you are wondering, where are all of Pat's family now? Mary is still a special education teacher, and Patrick Sr. is still a lawyer. Mary no longer blames the men in Pat's unit for his death, but still wants McChyrstal to be held accountable for his central role in the cover-up. When asked who she would like apologies from on the 20th anniversary of Pat's death, she said, quote, "I don't think it would matter anymore for me. I'd like to see them have some accountability. I'd like to see McChyrstal have accountability. I'd like to see those corporations that hire McChyrstal as a consultant or to give speeches turn on him and say, you know, your track record really isn't that great in terms of integrity and honesty and truthfulness, so maybe we don't want you to advise us anymore." Now, aside from the retired fall guy, Kensinger, every official involved was eventually promoted, likely because their effectiveness in the cover-up was a good thing for the Army. McChyrstal would later run all Army operations in Afghanistan under the Obama administration. McChyrstal was eventually asked about his involvement in Pat's cover-up, and before he was given control of the war in Afghanistan, John McCain questioned him on whether Pat deserved the Silver Star. Once again, he blames memory, miscommunication, and military protocols for his role.
In the case of Corporal Tillman, a Silver Star was recommended. I sat down with the people who recommended it, but that was higher than some had been given, and we went over a whiteboard and we looked at the geometry of the battlefield, and I queried the people to satisfy myself that, in fact, that his actions warranted that, even though there was a potential that the actual circumstance of death had been friendly fire. And I need to stress here, we had a number of famous people in American history killed by friendly fire, Stonewall Jackson, Leslie McNair, and the like. And I don't separate, or I don't believe that the circumstance of death detracts from his courage, commitment, or contribution. So I was comfortable recommending, once I believed that the people in the fight were convinced it warranted a Silver Star, and I was too, with forwarding that. I also sent a message informing my chain of command that we believed it was fratricide, and we did that when we were told there were going to be fairly high-profile memorial services. Now, what happens in retrospect is, and I would do this differently if I had the chance again, in retrospect, they look contradictory, because we sent a Silver Star that was not well written, and although I went through the process, I will tell you now I didn't review the citation well enough to capture, or I didn't catch, that if you read it, you could imply that it was not friendly fire. And also, when I sent the message, the intent entirely was to inform everybody up my chain of command so that nobody would be surprised. If I had it to do all over again, and we subsequently changed Army policy after this, because the intent on awards at that time was to do an award rapidly so that it could be presented to the family at the memorial service for their comfort. What we have learned since is it is better to take your time, make sure you get everything right with the award, and not rush it. So I say that in the two things which I believe were entirely well-intentioned on my part, and in my view, everyone forward that I saw was trying to do the right thing, it still produced confusion at a tragic time. And I'm very sorry for that, because I understand that the outcome produced a perception that I don't believe was at all involved, at least in the forces that were forward.
And you believe that Corporal Tillman earned the Silver Star by his actions before he died?
Sir, I absolutely do. I did then, I do now.
Now, Kevin Tillman was discharged from the Rangers 1 year after Pat's death. He stays out of the spotlight, occasionally writing essays about U.S. foreign policy. This essay, titled Pat's Birthday, was published 2 years after Pat was killed. In it, Kevin wrote, quote, "Somehow those afraid to fight in an illegal invasion decades ago are now allowed to send soldiers to die for an illegal invasion they started. Somehow, American leadership, whose only credit is lying to its people and illegally invading a nation, has been allowed to steal the courage, virtue, and honor of its soldiers on the ground." Marie Tillman started the Pat Tillman Foundation, which provides scholarships and grants to veterans committed to public service. And Pat's death is still used for propaganda. During the NFL protests, in which players kneeled during the national anthem, I'm sure many of you remember this time, to, protest the police brutality against African Americans, Trump retweeted this image. It's a tweet that says, NFL player Pat Tillman joined the U.S. Army in 2002. He was killed in action in 2004. He fought for our country/freedom, stand for our anthem, boycott NFL. And in response to this, Marie Tillman wrote, quote, "The very action of self-expression and the freedom to speak from one's heart, no matter those views, is what Pat and so many other Americans have given their lives for, even if they didn't always agree with those views." And when she was asked what she would like Pat Tillman's legacy to be, Mary said that he was a human being, that he is not some square-jawed guy in a beret, even though he was beautiful, but he was a human being. And he was funny, and he was smart-alecky, and he was like everybody else. And he was very passionate. And he did have passion for the country and what it stood for. He died doing something that he volunteered to do. It has brought attention to what the government, political people, and military people, and what they're capable of. Because Pat is not the only one, he's not the first one, and he's not the last. They lie to people every day, sadly, and they don't have to.
So in 2004, after Pat's death, the Arizona Cardinals actually created what is known as the Tillman Plaza, and it's located on the North Plaza of State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. And it's really beautiful. It features an 8-foot sculpture of bronze and stone portraying Pat about to charge the field while he's holding his helmet. And also in 2017, more recently, ASU actually unveiled a bronze sculpture of Pat in his ASU uniform. And it stands at the top of the Tillman Tunnel that leads players onto the field. And what's really cool is that when players are going onto the field, it's like a tradition that they touch the statue as they're charging the field. And there's a quote from Pat right underneath the statue that says, "Somewhere inside, we hear a voice. It leads us in the direction of who we wish to become, but it is up to us whether or not to follow."
I love that.
I know, it's awesome. It's a beautiful statue. And both the ASU Sun Devils and the Arizona Cardinals have retired Pat Tillman's numbers, 40 and 42. And then in 2004, this is great, the Pat Tillman Foundation was created, and the foundation supports the education and leadership development of veterans and military spouses primarily through its Tillman Scholarship Program. And these scholarships provide students with anything, related to their studies, whether it's tuition, book expenses, whatever it is. And throughout the years, the Pat Tillman Foundation has invested over $34 million in scholarships and leadership development and has provided close to 900 Tillman scholars.
That's amazing. And that's the one we mentioned earlier that Mary Tillman started. Yeah.
I wanted to bring up one other thing related to the Pat Tillman Award for Service that I mentioned at the beginning that the ESPN created, because that has been, there's been some controversy around the latest recipient, Prince Harry.
Shut up.
Yes.
Dude, this shit is ridiculous.
This is
Prince Harry?
Yeah, they're giving it to Prince Harry this year.
Why?
This was created in 2014 to recognize people with a strong connection to sports who have served others in a way that echoes her son's legacy. And Mary was not too pleased about it.
Wait, strong connection to sports? Am I missing something?
So Harry was selected for his tireless work in making a positive impact for the veteran community through the power of sport. He's set to receive...
He did serve, right? In the military?
He's supposed to get this award tomorrow, July 11th.
Oh, well, we're recording this in advance. So he has already gotten it by the time this episode goes
Yes.
out. But he served in the military too, right?
He served for 10 years, right? And
Yeah.
Weird choice though, yeah.
Yeah, there's some organization he works with that is, I believe, is sports related. Yeah, Mary was. Here's what she had to say.
Seems like a publicity move.
Yeah, she said, "I am shocked as to why they would select such a controversial and divisive individual to receive the award." And she said this to the Daily Mail. There are individuals working in the veteran community that are doing tremendous things to assist veterans. These individuals do not have the money, resources, connections, or privilege that Prince Harry has. And if you look at past recipients, it makes a lot of sense because it's nobody like Prince Harry. I think the closest recipient might have been like John McCain in 2019, but then it's been like Jon Stewart won the award in 2020 for all of his work that he did with 9/11 first responders.
Yeah, there's someone who fucking deserves it.
Who decides who's getting this?
That is
I
think it's ESPN.
Yes, it's nobody associated with the Tillman family.
It's the ESPYs. Yeah. ESPYs select it. Yeah.
Which is unfortunate because it's just like I understand why they did this because they, as part of this deal, they give money to the Pat Tillman Foundation. So I understand why they did that. And they trusted, like, you're not going to do any more bullshit with our son's name. But clearly, they made a ridiculous choice with Prince Harry as this recipient, dude.
Fuck. It seems like purely just publicity to pick someone like that. Yeah. Wow.
He did serve in Afghanistan. He did 2 tours in the country, and then he went on to found Invictus Games, an athletic competition for sick and wounded service personnel and veterans in 2014.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely not a terrible person. I know people are very split on Prince Harry, and I don't know that much about him. I have heard
But I think it's
about him compared to most of the royals, but
yeah,
doesn't seem like a good choice for this.
Yeah, well, and I think Mary nailed it. It's like he's divisive because of all the drama with the royal family and everything, and also he's had privilege and resources. I mean, he's a part of the royal family.
Yeah.
So there's many other unsung heroes out there who this award would have been more appropriate for. Like when you think about if this is really based off like Pat Tillman.
Yeah,
Prince
he
Harry?
would not want.
No, that's honestly, it's kind of disrespectful.
He'd want your everyday person who's not worried about doing things for the publicity of it, for the recognition,
Yeah.
If it was truly Pat making the decisions.
For me, really, it was, sort of coming to terms with the fact that this person that I loved and had been in my life for a really long time, and that I had always thought would always be in my life was gone. And, sort of how do you pick up the pieces and put your life back together when it's not turning out the way you thought it would?
But man, what a story. What a story. It's, I still am like, what the fuck happened? Like, I still think it's so unclear as to what really happened that day. I think all signs point to a horrible, horrible accident due to negligence by the higher ups who actually ordered this all to go down. At the very least, I mean, who really knows at this point? But sad that we have no way of holding these people accountable whatsoever, and that the military does their own punishment, and it's like, oh, pay cut or demotion
to who we want.
But is anybody getting locked up for this? No. As usually goes for higher ups in any aspect of the government or military.
It's just the fact that they all knew.
You think George Bush knew?
Yeah, he clearly did. Totally. They changed his fucking speech. And he knew that.
They were smart with Mr. Bush because they just didn't have a clear paper trail to him.
Yeah.
They sent that P4 memo to basically be like, okay, all you guys know the president, you should tell him not to do this.
Clue him in just in case they fucking figure this out.
Right. So
damn crazy.
Literally, this cover up is included with everyone at the highest level, from Bush to Rumsfeld to everyone.
Yeah, that's crazy. The whole administration. knew about this, but
I think it's all the things that every administration knows and covers up. I mean, it's all incredibly corrupt, both sides. So
if there's any others out there that we haven't covered, definitely let us know.
Yeah, let us know if you have any other suggestions.
Dig into some more stories like this.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously we want to know your thoughts on Pat Tillman's story, and what do you think happened? Definitely want to know in the comments below, or if you're listening, let us know on social media. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Just wanted to say again, though, what an incredible person.
And family. I mean, I'm a big fan.
Yes.
I
Not only did they raise seemingly 3 wonderful children, but just the way that they handled all of this and still speak with such grace, and
it's inspiring.
It is. They really all are. God, I'm just looking at his face right now. It's so insane.
But that's going to be it for us today. Thanks for joining us for another one. Till next time.
Keep on taking your mind a mile higher.